In a peaceful town where everything seemed serene, Emma found herself swept off her feet by Daniel, a man who seemed to possess all the qualities of a perfect partner. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something close, an undeniable spark, a connection so strong that she felt as if they were destined to meet. The town, with its cobblestone streets and charming little cafes, felt like a picture from a romantic novel. Emma had grown tired of the predictable life she had been leading, never quite finding someone who matched her desires and her dreams. Until Daniel. He was different. The way he smiled, the way his eyes seemed to understand her in ways no one else ever had, it was all so captivating. He didn't try too hard, didn't say the right words because he knew they'd be expected. Instead, his words were simple yet genuine. She found comfort in his presence, the way he paid attention to the smallest details, the way he made her feel safe, secure, and seen. Their first meeting had been at a small bookstore, a moment that would forever remain etched in her mind. As Emma stood there, browsing through the romance novel section, her fingers brushed lightly against Daniel's. They had both reached for the same book, a coincidence, yet it felt like fate. His smile was warm, his voice kind. What started as a brief conversation turned into hours spent at a nearby cafe, talking about everything and nothing at all. Daniel was open about his life, sharing his dreams, his passions, and even his vulnerabilities. Emma was drawn to his honesty, his openness. As their relationship bloomed, Emma couldn't help but feel that this was the start of something special. Daniel did everything right. He remembered her favorite flowers, he surprised her with little notes, and most of all, he made her feel important. Their days were filled with laughter, gentle teasing, and long walks under the stars. Emma was falling, not just for the man Daniel portrayed to the world, but for the version of him that he had shared with her, the one who was thoughtful, caring, and protective. She allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to open up in ways she had never done before. This was a love story, Emma thought, and she was finally living the fairy tale she had always dreamed about. But as time went on, the story began to take a dark turn. The first signs were subtle, small, seemingly harmless things that she chose to overlook. Daniel would send frequent text messages, asking where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. At first, it was flattering, the attention showing how much he cared. But then the messages grew more frequent. The questions became more pointed. What was she wearing? Why was she late? What time was she coming home? Emma brushed it off at first, attributing it to the nerves of a man who was deeply in love. But soon, the questions turned into demands. She found herself explaining every detail of her day, where she had gone, who she had seen. The control began to creep in, disguised as concern, as though he was looking out for her. But she could feel the grip tightening, the space between them growing smaller, as if his presence was suffocating her. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. This was someone else entirely, someone she wasn't sure she recognized. The charming, warm smile was still there, but now it felt forced, almost rehearsed. There were times when she'd catch a glimpse of something darker in his eyes, a coldness that sent shivers down her spine. Emma began questioning the reality of their relationship. She had ignored the warning signs, hoping they were just figments of her imagination. But as days passed, the feeling of unease only deepened. In the beginning, Emma had thought she had found her soulmate, the one who would stand beside her through everything. But now, she was starting to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. What had once felt like a dream was now turning into a nightmare, and the man she had trusted was slowly showing a side of himself that she couldn't understand. The love she had once believed in was now tangled in a web of confusion, manipulation, and fear. The stage was set, and Emma was standing on the edge, unsure of how to move forward. Was she in too deep? Could she walk away before it was too late? Or was she already trapped in a love that had turned dark, unable to break free from the man who had once made her feel safe but now made her question everything? The story had only just begun, but Emma was already questioning the path she was on. Was love enough to save her, or had it already turned into something far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined? Emma had always believed that love was supposed to feel like a sanctuary, a place of warmth and security. But lately, something about her relationship with Daniel had shifted. It wasn't the loving gaze he once cast upon her or the spontaneous gestures of affection that made her feel cherished. No, it was the weight of his presence, his need to control every aspect of her life, that had begun to smother her. It was subtle at first, like a creeping shadow that she tried to ignore. A misplaced word here, a disapproving glance there. And then, gradually, it became something undeniable. The first inkling of unease began when Daniel started questioning her whereabouts more frequently. She hadn't even realized it at first. She'd been late returning home from dinner with her friends, and when she walked through the door, Daniel's gaze was colder than usual. "Where were you?" he had asked, his voice tight. She shrugged it off, attributing it to a long day, and explained that they had lingered over dessert. His expression softened, but she could see the flicker of something in his eyes, an unfamiliar, possessive gleam. From that moment, things began to change. The calls started coming more frequently, not just to check in, but to demand details. "What are you doing right now? Who are you with?" He would always ask these questions with a level of sweetness that could almost pass for concern, but Emma could feel the underlying tension in his words. She thought it was harmless at first, a simple need for reassurance. Maybe he was just protective of her, but as the days went by, the calls became more intrusive. The words, once tender, now felt more like chains, pulling her into a reality where her every move was being monitored. At first, Emma thought it was just a phase, a result of him dealing with stress at work or family pressure. But as the days wore on, the little things began to gnaw at her. He had started to comment on how she dressed. "Don't you think that outfit is a little too revealing?" he had remarked one evening, his tone casual but edged with something else. He didn't like her hanging out with certain friends anymore, calling them bad influences or accusing them of not having her best interests at heart. It wasn't overt. It wasn't loud or aggressive. But the subtlety made it all the more insidious. The world outside their relationship, her friends, her career, seemed to pale in comparison to what Daniel wanted for her. And slowly, it became harder for her to see the line between what was normal and what was not. But Emma, ever the optimist, told herself that he was just going through a tough time. She reassured herself that all relationships had their bumps, and this would pass. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that Daniel's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, and it was escalating. One night, Emma was supposed to meet a few girlfriends for drinks, something they had done countless times before. She had been looking forward to it all week, an escape from the tension that had been building at home. But when she mentioned it to Daniel, he wasn't pleased. "Do you really have to go out tonight?" he asked, a slight frown crossing his face. "Why don't we just stay in? I'd rather spend time with you." His voice was sweet, almost pleading, but Emma could sense the undercurrent of control. The conflict inside her started to build. On one hand, she loved Daniel, and she didn't want to upset him. On the other, she needed space, needed time to unwind with her friends. She had always been independent, and this clinginess was suffocating. She stood her ground, telling him that she was going, that it would be good for both of them. His face hardened, but he didn't argue further. However, what should have been a fun night quickly turned sour. As Emma was talking to her friends at the bar, enjoying the rare chance to let loose, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she found Daniel standing there, his face tight with anger. "I thought I told you to be careful," he hissed. "Who's that guy you're talking to? You're out here flirting, aren't you?" His words stung. Emma's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Her friends stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to say. "Daniel, it's not like that," Emma protested, trying to calm him down. "It's just a friendly conversation." But Daniel wasn't listening. His jealousy had taken over. "I don't trust them, Emma. They don't care about you the way I do," he spat, his words sharp like daggers. It wasn't just the words that stung. It was the way he had humiliated her in front of her friends, the way he had stripped her of her agency and made her feel small. Her friends tried to intervene, but Daniel silenced them with a cold glare. It was clear this wasn't just about jealousy, it was about control, about asserting his dominance over her. The drive home was silent, the air thick with tension. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him how suffocating his behavior was, but she didn't. Instead, she swallowed her anger and tried to suppress her growing unease. When they arrived at the apartment, Daniel's mood shifted again. He was apologetic, remorseful. "I'm sorry, babe. I don't know what came over me. I just get worried when you're out with other guys," he explained, his voice soft and pleading. Emma felt a pang of sympathy. She had seen the vulnerability in his eyes, and for a brief moment, she believed him. But something inside her had shifted. The cracks that had been forming were now undeniable. She couldn't shake the feeling that the man she had fallen in love with, the man she thought she knew, was slipping away, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. Over the next few days, Emma became more cautious around him. She tried to keep her distance, but Daniel's watchful eyes seemed to follow her everywhere. It wasn't just the phone calls or the questioning anymore. Now, he was snooping through her things, checking her phone when she wasn't around, monitoring her every move. Emma noticed the way he would glance at her phone when it buzzed with a message, his eyes lingering for just a second too long. The subtlety was gone. He had become brazen in his need for control. It was after one of these incidents, when she had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she grabbed a drink, that Emma's suspicions truly took root. When she returned, Daniel was holding her phone in his hands, his face unreadable. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low and almost dangerous. Emma froze. "It's just a message from a colleague," she said quickly, but Daniel didn't seem convinced. He scrolled through the phone, pausing at messages that seemed innocuous, but his face darkened with every word. "I don't like this," he muttered, handing the phone back to her. "You should be more careful about who you talk to." Emma was rattled. Her heart pounded in her chest. The violation felt unbearable. She had trusted him, had never imagined that the man she was planning to marry would invade her privacy like this. But again, when she confronted him, Daniel became the picture of calmness, apologizing profusely, promising that he only wanted to protect her. He was looking out for her, he said. He loved her too much to let anything or anyone come between them. Emma wanted to believe him, but deep down, a cold knot of fear was forming in her stomach. The tension reached its peak one afternoon when Daniel insisted on accompanying Emma to a lunch with her old friend, Mike, a man she had known since childhood. There was nothing romantic about their relationship, but Daniel was insistent. "It'll be good for me to meet him," he said, though his tone left no room for negotiation. Emma tried to argue, but he was unyielding. At lunch, Daniel hovered over her, casting glances at Mike that were full of mistrust. Mike noticed it too, and the awkwardness in the air was palpable. As they sat down to eat, Daniel's gaze never left Mike. "So, Mike, what's new with you?" he asked, his voice tight. Emma could see the way Daniel was sizing him up, assessing him as though he were a threat. Mike, for his part, was uncomfortable. He had always been supportive of Emma, but now he seemed wary, unsure of how to navigate the growing tension between the two men. Emma couldn't ignore the icy atmosphere that hung over the table. It wasn't just the jealousy, it was the feeling that Daniel was trying to stake his claim, to mark her as his property. When the lunch ended, Emma felt a profound sense of unease, as though she had been an unwilling participant in an unspoken battle. Daniel walked her to the car in silence, but his clenched jaw and tense posture spoke volumes. Later that night, when Emma tried to speak with him about what had happened, Daniel grew defensive, accusing her of not understanding how much he cared. "I'm just trying to keep you safe," he said, but his words were hollow. Emma knew deep down that what she was experiencing wasn't love, it was manipulation. She had tried to ignore it, to brush it off as his insecurities, but now it was undeniable. She was losing herself in a relationship that was slowly suffocating her. And she wasn't sure if she had the strength to break free. The breaking point had come, though Emma didn't want to admit it. Everything about her relationship with Daniel now felt like a tangled web she couldn't escape. The small signs she had once overlooked, the controlling behavior, the jealousy, the subtle digs, had escalated to something far more dangerous. The person she had fallen in love with seemed distant, replaced by a man who seemed incapable of seeing her as anything other than a possession. It all came to a head one evening when Daniel, without warning, confronted her with an ultimatum that shook her to the core. She had been out for coffee with a friend from work, something she hadn't done in weeks due to the growing tension between her and Daniel. The time together had been a welcome escape, a small taste of the independence she longed for. When she returned home, she was greeted by Daniel's icy silence. He was standing in the living room when she walked in, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw set in a hard line. She could sense that something was off, that he was waiting for her. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. "I told you," she replied, trying to keep her tone casual. "I was with Sarah. We had coffee, just catching up." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "And you couldn't have told me that before you left? You know how I feel about you spending time with people like her." His words stung, though Emma couldn't tell if it was his judgment or his tone that hurt more. Sarah was a friend she had known for years, a person who had always supported her. Yet to Daniel, anyone who didn't fit into his idea of what she should have in her life was a threat. "I don't need your approval for every little thing I do, Daniel," Emma replied, her voice faltering. "I'm allowed to see my friends." "That's not what I'm saying," Daniel countered, his voice rising ever so slightly. "But you need to understand that you're mine. And when you leave without telling me, when you hide things, you make me question everything. You make me feel like you don't care." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard these words before, and every time they came, they felt more suffocating. His love wasn't the safe haven she once believed it to be. It had become a prison, one where her every move was scrutinized, judged, and controlled. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and yet, a part of her still wanted to believe that he was just stressed, that his emotions had gotten the better of him. "I'm not hiding anything," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm just living my life, Daniel. I'm still here, aren't I? I'm still with you." "That's not good enough anymore," he shot back. His eyes glistened with an intensity that made Emma take a step back. "I want you to understand, Emma. If you really cared, you'd stop testing me, stop putting me through this. I want you to choose right now. It's either me or everyone else. You can't have both." The weight of his words sank in slowly. Emma had heard the threats before, but this time, they felt different. This time, he wasn't merely expressing his frustration. He was demanding control over her life, her choices, her friendships. "I don't want to choose," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "I shouldn't have to." But Daniel wasn't listening. His face hardened, his gaze unrelenting. "Then I guess we have a problem." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Emma stood frozen, staring at him, unable to comprehend what was happening. She had never thought that a relationship could feel so stifling, so out of control. But in that moment, she realized that Daniel's love wasn't love at all. It was fear. His fear of losing her, of losing the one thing that made him feel secure, had turned into something darker, more dangerous. "You're not the person I thought you were," Emma finally managed to say, her voice a mixture of sadness and resolve. "This isn't love, Daniel. It's control. And I can't live like this anymore." His expression faltered for a brief moment, but it quickly morphed into something more sinister. "You don't understand," he said, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "I'm doing this because I love you. I'm protecting you. You need me." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The words that had once been sweet now felt hollow, empty. She knew with every fiber of her being that this wasn't love. It was something far worse. Without thinking, she took a step back. "I'm not staying," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I can't stay in this. Not anymore." For a moment, Daniel didn't move. He simply stared at her, as though processing the words, as though he couldn't fathom her defiance. But then, the anger in his eyes flared, and he took a step toward her. "You think you can just leave?" His voice was harsh, filled with venom. "You think you can walk away from me, after everything I've done for you? I won't let you." Emma's pulse quickened as she realized that this was it, the breaking point. The moment she had feared had arrived. She had never seen him like this before, so unhinged, so desperate. He was no longer the man she had once loved, he had become someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice unwavering despite the fear that gripped her. "And if you try to stop me, I swear to God, I'll call the police." The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Daniel's eyes flickered with something darker. Rage, disbelief, and a twisted sort of hurt. "You don't know what you're doing," he spat. "You'll regret this. You can't just walk away from me. I won't let you." But Emma was resolute. She turned and walked toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her. As she opened the door, she looked back one last time. Daniel was standing there, his face contorted with anger and confusion. But the man she had known, the man she had once loved, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, someone capable of causing her harm. Emma stepped outside into the cool night air, her breath shallow, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of what she had just done, but at the same time, a sense of liberation washed over her. She had taken back control. She had made the choice to leave, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her freedom. The road ahead wasn't clear, and she knew it wouldn't be easy. Daniel wasn't going to let go quietly. But Emma had crossed a threshold. She had made it through the storm, and now, the only thing left to do was move forward. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions for Emma. She had left Daniel, but the decision, while necessary, wasn't easy. The apartment she had once shared with him now felt foreign hollow. The familiar corners, once filled with love and laughter, seemed to mock her as she sat alone, contemplating the events that had led to this moment. The weight of the confrontation with Daniel was still fresh in her mind. His words, so full of venom and accusation, echoed in her ears as she tried to process everything. She couldn't understand how things had escalated so quickly. What had once been tender gestures, sweet words, and promises had turned into something unrecognizable. The love she had once believed in had been twisted into something controlling, possessive, and ultimately suffocating. Emma's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, from family, and even a few from Daniel. She didn't respond to his texts, not because she hated him, but because she feared he would find a way to manipulate her back into his life. His love had become something she could no longer trust, and no matter how much she wanted to forgive him, she knew it would be a mistake. His emotional grip on her had been suffocating enough to last a lifetime. She sat by the window, staring at the city outside. It was strange. The sun seemed brighter now, the world outside so much more open. But the uncertainty still lingered, like a shadow. Emma was free, yes, but the unknown loomed before her. What was next for her? She had no idea. She wasn't sure what her future would look like, but she was certain of one thing: she couldn't go back to the life she had just escaped. That night, her phone rang. It was her mother. The one person who had always been her pillar of support, even when Emma hadn't realized it. Her mother had always been cautious about her relationship with Daniel, but Emma had brushed off her concerns. She couldn't do that anymore. She answered the call. Emma, her mother's voice came through the line, warm and concerned. "I know this is difficult, sweetheart. But you did the right thing." Emma swallowed, trying to hold back tears. "I know, Mom. But it still hurts. It's not easy." "I know it's not," her mother replied gently. "But you don't deserve to be with someone who doesn't respect you. You deserve someone who supports you, someone who makes you feel safe and loved. Not controlled." Emma nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. The words felt like a balm on the raw, open wound of her heart. She needed to hear them. She needed to be reminded that what she had done was for her own good, even if it didn't feel that way at the moment. "I'm proud of you, Emma," her mother continued. "It's hard to make these decisions. It's even harder to stick with them when things get tough. But I know you're strong. You're my daughter." Emma could feel the tightness in her chest begin to ease, just a little. Her mother's words helped to ground her. She had made the right choice. She had to keep reminding herself of that, because the pain of breaking free from Daniel was still so raw. The love they had once shared felt distant, like a dream that now seemed impossible to return to. Over the next few days, Emma kept her distance from Daniel. She had to, for her own peace of mind. She didn't block him, she wasn't that cruel, but she didn't respond. She couldn't afford to let him back into her life, even for a moment. His messages ranged from pleading, to angry, to apologetic. He tried every angle, hoping one of them would break through to her. In one message, he accused her of abandoning him when he needed her most. In another, he told her he was lost without her. He even apologized, promising to change, to do whatever it took to win her back. Emma felt a surge of emotion with every message, but she refused to respond. His words were manipulative, disguised as remorse. She knew better now. Emma had always prided herself on being independent. She had built a life for herself before Daniel ever entered the picture, and she knew she could do it again. But she also knew that the road ahead would be difficult. Leaving Daniel had been the right choice, but it didn't take away the ache in her chest. It didn't erase the feelings of betrayal, or the years of emotional manipulation. But it did open a door to a new beginning, even if that beginning was uncertain. She spent her days focusing on her work, reconnecting with friends she had lost touch with during her time with Daniel. It was awkward at first, as though they didn't know how to approach the changes in her life. But slowly, the warmth of their support began to heal the wounds she had carried for so long. They were there for her in ways she hadn't realized she needed. One afternoon, as she sat at a cafe with Sarah, Emma allowed herself a moment of reflection. Sarah had been a constant in her life, a friend who had always been there, even when Emma had been too wrapped up in her toxic relationship to realize it. Sarah listened patiently as Emma recounted the details of her breakup with Daniel, and for the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel alone. "You did the right thing, Em," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "I know it's hard now, but you're better off without him. You deserve someone who sees you for who you are, not for who they want you to be." Emma smiled weakly. "I know. I just feel so lost. It's like I don't know who I am without him." "That's normal," Sarah reassured her. "But you'll find yourself again. You'll rediscover who you are. You've got this." The conversation was a turning point for Emma. It was the first time she truly understood that healing wasn't something that would happen overnight. It was a process, and it would take time. But she was ready to take that first step. A few days later, Emma received a letter. It was from Daniel. At first, she hesitated to open it, but then she remembered that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. She could handle whatever was inside. She opened the letter, her heart pounding. The words inside were filled with apologies and regret. He spoke of how he missed her, how he couldn't understand why she had left, and how he was willing to do anything to make things right. The letter ended with one final plea. "Please, Emma. Come back to me. I need you." Emma read the letter several times, each time feeling a different emotion. Part of her still wanted to believe that the person she had fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. But deep down, she knew better. Daniel's love had always been about control, not partnership. He didn't see her as an equal, he saw her as something he could own. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer of her desk. It was time to let go completely, to stop looking back. Her life, though uncertain, was hers to build. And this time, she would do it on her terms. The final phase of Emma's transformation was marked by a quiet acceptance. It had been weeks since the breakup with Daniel, and she had come to understand that healing wasn't a linear path. There were still moments of pain, moments of doubt, and moments when she missed the person she had thought Daniel was. But those moments were becoming fewer, replaced by something else: strength. The strength to move forward, to choose herself over the toxic relationship that had once consumed her. As Emma settled into this new phase of her life, she began to rebuild the pieces that had been broken. The process was slow, sometimes even frustrating, but she was committed to it. She was slowly letting go of the person she had been when she was with Daniel, and allowing herself to grow into the person she was always meant to be. One of the first steps was rediscovering her independence. She had spent years living under the shadow of Daniel's controlling behavior, and now, for the first time in a long time, Emma felt free. She could make her own decisions without fear of judgment or manipulation. She could choose what she wanted, where she wanted to go, and who she wanted to be around, without the constant pressure of someone else's expectations. There was a certain kind of liberation in this newfound freedom, even if it was still unfamiliar. Emma also began to reconnect with her passions, the things that had once made her feel alive. She spent more time painting, something she hadn't done in years. The art had always been an outlet for her, a way to express her emotions when words failed. And now, as she put brush to canvas, she felt a sense of release, a sense of reclaiming her power. Each stroke was a small step toward healing, a small affirmation that she was reclaiming the life that was rightfully hers. The support from her friends and family also played a crucial role in her recovery. Sarah had been there for her from the beginning, never wavering in her belief that Emma deserved better. Her other friends too had rallied around her, offering their own words of encouragement, giving her the space she needed to heal, and helping her regain a sense of self-worth. Emma realized just how much she had taken them for granted in the past. She had been so consumed with her relationship with Daniel that she hadn't fully appreciated the people who had always had her back. Gradually, Emma began to see that the world didn't revolve around her relationship with Daniel. There was so much more to life, so many other opportunities, so many other people who cared about her. She started meeting new people, making new connections, and even considering dating again. But she knew she wasn't ready yet. She needed to be whole again, not just for someone else, but for herself. She needed to find her own happiness before she could share it with anyone else. There were, of course, moments of doubt. There were nights when Emma would lie awake, thinking about Daniel, wondering if she had made the right choice. What if she had overreacted? What if things could have been different? But these thoughts were fleeting. The reality of her situation, the emotional strain, the manipulation, the suffocation, was far more powerful than the small whispers of doubt. Emma knew she had made the right choice. And with each passing day, that truth became more solidified. In the months that followed, Emma's life began to look very different.
She had changed.
She had become someone more aware of her own needs and more unwilling to compromise them for the sake of someone else. She had learned the hard way that love should never come at the cost of her own identity.
Her work life flourished, too.
Emma's career had always been important to her, but with the emotional weight of her relationship with Daniel lifted, she found herself able to focus more on her ambitions. She began pursuing new projects, taking on more responsibilities, and gaining recognition for her talents. It felt good to succeed on her own, without the shadow of someone else's approval hanging over her. Then, one evening, as Emma sat in her apartment, sipping a glass of wine, she realized how far she had come. The woman she had been a year ago, the one who had been scared and uncertain, was no longer the same person sitting in front of the window. She was stronger, more self-assured, and more in control of her life. She was no longer the woman who lived for someone else. She had found her voice, her strength, and her independence. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her mother, as it so often was.
Just checking in. I'm so proud of you, Emma. You've come so far.
She smiled softly, reading the message.
Her mother was right. She had come so far.
The road had been hard, but it had led her to a place where she could finally see her own worth. And that was something no one, not even Daniel, could take away from her.
Emma's heart had healed.
The scars were still there, but they were no longer the defining part of her story. She had learned to trust herself again, to know her own value, and to understand that no relationship, no matter how passionate or intense, should ever make her feel small or insignificant. With each passing day, Emma was becoming the person she had always wanted to be, strong, independent, and free. She had walked away from the darkness, and though the light wasn't always easy to find, it was always there. She knew that no matter what the future held, she was ready for it. She could face whatever challenges came her way because she had already faced the hardest one of all, herself. The final message from Daniel had come months ago. He had apologized one last time, acknowledging his mistakes and asking if they could start over. Emma had read it once, and then deleted it. She knew that part of her life was over. It was a chapter that had taught her valuable lessons, but it was now closed. As Emma moved forward, she carried with her the lessons learned from the past. She no longer defined her worth by anyone else's standards. She knew that the most important relationship in her life was the one she had with herself. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. With that, Emma was ready for whatever the next chapter held. She had reclaimed her life, her power, and her sense of self. She was finally free.